Good morning, and thank you for joining us today. I'm Gary Elliott, Chief Executive of the Aerospace Technology Institute. If you're not familiar with the ATI, we create the technology strategy for the UK aerospace sector and fund world-class R&D through the ATI funding programme, working alongside government and industry to transform aerospace through technology and innovation. Since 2014, we have invested in £3.7 billion of joint funding in more than 400 aerospace projects, delivering economic benefits across the nations and regions of the UK. Aerospace employs over 100,000 people in the UK and is one of the 8 frontier industries highlighted as key to UK growth in the government's modern industrial strategy, which also gave a 10-year commitment to ATI funding. That funding means that by 2035, the ATI funding programme will have invested £8 billion of joint government industry funding in UK aerospace. Considering £1 of ATI investment achieves a return of 14 additional whole economy output, you get a sense of the scale and potential for the sector. This then is the backdrop to us launching the new UK Aerospace Technology Strategy, our 5th market-led technology strategy, the last being in 2022. So today we are launching Engineering Growth. Delivering the next generation of aerospace technologies is a blueprint for sustainable growth in the industry and provides an independent assessment of the investment priorities for our sector, including through ATI funding. The new strategy sets out 3 things. Firstly, a vision for growth. As a sector, we have a unique opportunity to double the UK's market value to $18 billion by 2035, targeting $41 billion by 2050. Secondly, the technology plan, delivering competitive world-leading technology at scale across 4 updated technology roadmaps. And thirdly, investing in a sustainable future, highlighting the opportunity for public and private investment beyond ATI funding. Achieving our market potential in the next generation single-aisle and future wide-body programs will require focus, leadership and additional investment. Our sector must deliver mature, competitive technology at the rate, cost and quality required and be able to demonstrate that capability around the end of the decade. At the same time, the sector remains steadfast in its commitment to address environmental impact, whilst realising this generational growth opportunity through new technology and operational improvements. So again, thank you for joining this morning, and I look forward to taking your questions later. We will now run a short video before you hear from Paul Adams, our Chief Innovation Officer.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Paul Adams. I'm the Chief Innovation Officer at the Aerospace Technology Institute. And what I want to do over the next few minutes is step back and explain why this strategy matters now and why the opportunity in front of the UK is bigger than we've seen before. The starting point is this: the global aerospace sector is entering a significant growth phase. Our analysis suggests it more than quadruples in value between now and 2050. That's not incremental growth. It's a structural shift driven by demand, by technology change, and by decarbonisation. And the key question for the UK as an aerospace industry sector is not whether that growth happens. It's whether the UK captures its share, and that depends on the decisions we make now. as with everything we do at the ATI, we anchor our work in a market scenario, in what we think is going to happen in the future, and so it is for this strategy. This isn't a prediction down to exact dates, but it is a directionally robust view based on extensive engagement with many of you across the sector, with government and industry peers. And what it shows is 4 major aircraft development waves between now and 2050. 2 of those, the next generation single aisle and wide body, drive the bulk of the value over the period of our forecast. The other 2, ultra efficient turboprops and zero carbon regional aircraft, are smaller initially, but they are important stepping stones to what comes next. The key point is this, that the aerospace industry moves in cycles, and those cycles determine where value sits globally. And if we align with them, we can enjoy a significant period of growth, not just now, but for a long time into the future. If we miss them, we don't. So let's quantify that demand. We expect over 65,000 new aircraft being delivered between now and 2050. 70% of those will be in the single aisle market segment. That demand is already visible today in the backlog, and I know for many of you across the UK that demand will also be already visible on your factory floors. But what's different as we move forward into the future is the rate challenge. Whilst today seems a real challenge for us to continue to meet the volumes expected by the major aircraft OEMs, tomorrow's single aisle aircraft will need to be built faster, at higher volumes and at lower cost than we've ever seen before. And that changes what competitiveness means, both for us in the UK, across the entire supply chain, but also with our global competitors. It's not just about having the best technology. It's also about delivering reliably at rate and at cost. That's where advanced manufacturing, automation, and digital approaches really start to matter. And you'll see that reflected in the changes we've made to our technology strategy roadmaps. And that brings us to what we've called the generational prize. The next generation single-aisle aircraft is the single biggest opportunity in global aerospace over the next 25 years. It's an enormous opportunity that the UK has a realistic shot at leading major parts of. Our analysis suggests that this could be worth around $24 billion annually to the UK by 2050, and that represents a step change from where we are today. It's driven by new engines. It's driven by new wings and new wing designs. It's driven by advanced systems, all of which need to be delivered at those higher production rates. Because capturing value is essential through that delivery process, and that will drive the kind of market increases we see across the sector. These programs, as many of you know across this sector, are decided well before entry into service date. And so once that work share is set, it tends to stay that way for decades. So this is a really important moment in time for us as the UK to lay down where we see technology moving and where we see the UK leading in technology. It's where these early decisions that we make and that you make in your organisations every day translate into long-term industry value. And none of this happens without investment, and importantly, not just public funding, but private capital as well, flowing into the right opportunities. And ICOMAT is a really good example of how this can work. The ATI support that was provided to ICOMAT helped bridge the gap between breakthrough research and industrial scale, giving private investors the confidence to follow and step in. And that's a model that we want to replicate in organisations big and small across the UK. Public investment reduces risk, unlocking private capital and accelerating capability across the UK. Because ultimately, in our sector, in aerospace, value doesn't always go to the country that invents. It goes to the country that scales. And we want to make sure through the investment decisions we make that we can not only create the technologies that are essential for the next generation of aircraft, but that we can scale them as well. The good news in the UK is that we are already building on significant strengths across our sector. The UK has strong positions globally in the aerospace market. We lead in engines and wings. We produce over half the world's aircraft seating, and we have deep capability across systems, landing gear, and the broader supply chain, including key technology developments in forming technology and finishing technology. This is a sector that supports the whole UK economy. Wages in the aerospace sector are double the national average, and much of that value sits outside London, contributing directly to regional economies. So this strategy, in actual fact, is not just about the aerospace sector. It's about wider UK industrial strength. And the challenge is to maintain and extend our position of advantage and our areas of leadership, not just today, but in future generations of aircraft. Finally, none of this growth happens in isolation from sustainability. Decarbonisation is not a side constraint, it's a core driver of change in this sector. It's what will drive the next generation of aircraft and where the value will be, not just in decarbonising the emissions that are produced from aircraft, but also in supporting airlines and their associated organisation manage the variability we are all seeing in fuel price on a day-to-day basis. In the near term, the biggest impact comes from improving efficiencies, better engines, lighter structures, smarter systems, and that reduces fuel burn and emissions right away. But beyond that, we also see the introduction of zero carbon aircraft, hydrogen and electric, particularly from the 2040s onwards, having an impact. Of course, though, technology alone isn't enough. We also need sustainable aviation fuels, operational improvements, and carbon removals to meet our targets. So this transition is layered. And the message from this strategy is clear. The UK can lead in both growth and decarbonisation, but only if we act early and if we invest consistently. We hold the key in some of the major aircraft parts like engines and wings that drive decarbonisation, and we need to support and drive the future of those sectors. So that's the context for this strategy: a growing global market, a clear generational opportunity, and a strong UK foundation to build on. I'm now going to hand over to Jackie to talk you through the technologies that sit behind this, and in turn, how we take those opportunities and turn them into delivery.
Thank you, Paul. Good morning, I'm Jackie Castle, CTO at the ATI. And before we move on to see the new strategic technology roadmaps themselves, let me introduce what we mean by the technology plan section within the new strategy. So delivering competitive world-leading technology at scale requires the right partnerships, investments and capabilities. And this section of the strategy sets out the technologies that the UK should focus on developing to protect, grow and take on the new opportunities to remain at the forefront of future aerospace. The roadmaps show the timing by which technologies must be matured to meet future aircraft aims, and new target pages also provide realistic performance targets for those technologies to be competitive, so they have the best chance of being selected for exploitation on future aircraft. We also describe other key enablers needed to enhance productivity across the design, manufacturing, certification and through-life support. And all of this helps guide investment decisions. So if we now turn to the first of our 4 new technology roadmaps, technologies on the new ultra-efficient roadmap are the cornerstone of aerospace research. Each generation of aircraft is more efficient than the one it replaces, with advances in aerodynamics, propulsion, lightweight airframes and systems combining to reduce fuel burn and emissions. The roadmap shows relevant technology bricks out to 2050, split into 3 streams: propulsion, advanced systems and aerostructures. ATI modelling shows the next generation ultra-efficient single-aisle and wide-body aircraft could achieve energy improvements of 25% and 20% respectively, and will deliver the most significant reductions in aircraft tailpipe carbon emissions to 2050. But these technologies are important to reduce fuel burn for all future fuels and therefore apply to all aircraft types. The UK's strengths in wings, engines, and associated systems are the areas that drive the most of an aircraft's efficiency improvement. So this means we are uniquely placed to make a very strong contribution to future aircraft developments that are on the horizon. The roadmap shows technology bricks clustered around 2030, which represent those technologies that must reach TRL6 to be selected for the next generation single-aisle aircraft programs that are highly anticipated to be launched at the end of this decade. Whilst we can never be certain of these timeframes, to be late may be to miss out on a generational opportunity. And many live ATI projects cover technologies represented by this roadmap, and there are significant examples of UK progress in these technology areas since Destination Zero. These include testing of Rolls-Royce's UltraFan demonstrator large engine to full power at the highly sophisticated testbed 80 in Derby, its completion of 3 full-scale single-aisle size demonstrator wings, bringing together multiple next-generation technologies, advanced composite manufacturing, and new assembly processes to be tested as part of Airbus's Wing of Tomorrow research project in Bristol, plus Boeing's development of advanced composite facilities at the AMRC high-value manufacturing catapult facility in Sheffield. Taking these and other key technology bricks to TRL6, including many advancements in systems, such as for future landing gear, hybrid electrification, avionics, actuation, cabin and seats, will be important to secure the next generational opportunities. Beyond the 2030s and 40s, the roadmap focus on technologies to enable greater architectural changes to future airframes, such as blended wing body, higher levels of propulsive hybridization, and high voltage electrification, as well as quantum avionics and sophisticated aerodynamic functionalities, like morphing wing control systems for load alleviation, to name just a few. So if we move to our ultra efficient technologies target page, this summarizes key deliverables that the UK should achieve to demonstrate technology readiness and maturity to maximize our future opportunities. So beyond world-leading advancements in wings and engines, this includes systems electrification, 100% SAF-enabled propulsion and fuel systems, cyber-secure systems and avionics. And there are also key targets indicating the technological ambition to be competitive. And these parameters include fuel burn, weight, drag, engine time on wing, and noise. If we now look at our new zero carbon technology roadmap, this has been updated to set out the technologies required to enable first of their kind future vehicles using hydrogen or battery electric propulsion systems to eliminate completely tailpipe carbon emissions. Although zero carbon aircraft are not expected at scale before the late 2040s, technology development is needed now, alongside investment in regulation and infrastructure to reach those entry into service timescales. The technology bricks on this roadmap are now divided into 2 streams, focusing on energy storage and fuel systems and power distribution and control. They are taking the learning to date and specifically define the technology areas where focus is needed to unlock and advance the next steps, especially for higher power fuel cells, cryogenic liquid hydrogen capability, including specific system components like pumps, valves and pipes, and highly efficient cryogenic electrical power circuits. UK leadership in this area has delivered significant progress since 2022, with Safran certifying their ingenious 100 electric motor, Zero Avia and Vertical Aerospace conducting flight testing, UK consortia led by Rolls-Royce have ground tested hydrogen gas turbine combustion technologies, and led by GKN, developing multi-megawatt cryogenic hydrogen electric propulsion technologies, among many other smaller players that have also completed interesting technology developments. So the technology bricks on this roadmap are necessary to unlock scalable pathways to larger commercial aircraft in future decades. Many technology areas require lower TRL fundamental research to address the significant technology and certification challenges, particularly in cryogenics and electrification ambitions, including hyper or superconducting. And it's our aim for this new strategy to help guide research in academia to complement the ATI's research. The next slide shows our zero carbon technologies target page. And key deliverables for the UK are illustrated, such as qualified cryogenic materials and fuel system demonstrators. And we include targets looking beyond initial applications to megawatt plus scale fuel cells and electrical power system demonstrators. Key targets indicate the technical ambition needed to deliver the necessary performance for viable flight and include fuel cell and electric propulsion power densities, battery energy densities, and improvement targets for fuel tank gravimetric efficiency. Moving to our third roadmap, this covers industrial productivity and competitiveness technologies. This roadmap is an evolution of the previous cross-cutting enabling technologies roadmap. And beyond the 2030s and 40s, the roadmaps focus on the technologies driving industrial competitiveness in the UK aerospace are fundamental to realise the sustainability and economic benefits of ultra-efficient and zero carbon emission aircraft. So these technologies also provide significant spillover benefits to other advanced manufacturing sectors. The technologies in this roadmap will drive improvement in UK productivity, enabling the sector to exploit current market opportunities, delivering today's aircraft production rate ramp up, as well as be ready to maximise future market share targets. Preparation is necessary to meet the unprecedented manufacturing rates ahead for aerospace. As Paul mentioned, Airbus and Boeing single-aisle aircraft monthly production rates could each increase from around 50 today to 75 by 2028, and they each target production of 100 aircraft a month for their next generation aircraft, with rate-enabled manufacturing processes a key component of the design requirements. Adoption of advanced manufacturing, assembly and automation technologies is key to meet this demand. The Industrial Competitiveness Roadmap comprises multiple enablers and capabilities that support competitive aircraft design, analysis, validation, test and manufacturing across the whole aircraft lifecycle. It also considers assembly and automation, the use of AI and quantum computing, and advanced metallic and composite materials. Again, there are many pointers for important academic work on fundamental low TRL research across the roadmap. Examples of progress in this area since Destination Zero include the opening of Future Forge at the Advanced Forming Research Centre in Scotland, which is Europe's largest hot forging research facility, and the Whittle Lab's new rapid turbomachinery test facility opened, offering advanced testing techniques. There has been increased use of AI in practical applications such as for process quality control, and we see new SME innovations for advanced alloys to modelling techniques, amongst many others. The industrial competitive roadmap targets on the next slide include realistic gross value add ambitions in line with national productivity measures, targets for reductions in resource intensity, which takes into account material use, energy use and time, as well as improvements in design and manufacturing lead times. Key deliverables include increasing the UK aerospace grade material manufacturing capability by 2035 to be ready to supply the next generation production, and enhanced design and validation techniques. Production pilot lines demonstrating rate readiness for next generation single-aisle products and full lifestyle connected manufacturing and operations are also required in these timeframes. The fourth technology roadmap sets out the research actions needed to improve understanding and address aviation's broader atmospheric emissions. These non-CO2 emissions are the direct and indirect effects of combustion found in aircraft exhaust plumes, aside from carbon dioxide itself. This includes other gases like oxides of nitrogen and sulfur, as well as aerosols, soot and particulates. Non-CO2 emissions have an environmental impact, and the illustration here shows some of the complex interactions that can influence the effect, including emission altitude, weather and regional specifics, such as the occurrence of ice supersaturated regions that result in contrails. Emissions also vary in persistence and duration, and in some cases can have a cooling effect. So there remains a high level of uncertainty about the quantified impact, and increasing understanding and reducing this uncertainty is a key objective of the ATI's non-CO2 funding programme. Technologies, if we turn to the roadmap and talk about the technologies now, the ATI launched the world first roadmap in 2025, and it's now included within the new strategy for completeness. As mentioned, it informs activities funded under the ATI's non-CO2 programme, building on fundamental climate science to develop technologies and scale up solutions that will mitigate or prevent non-CO2 emissions during flight. And examples of progress since the programme launch include Project MIST, led by Honeywell in collaboration with Boeing and the University of Reading, that's aiming to advance in-flight sensing capabilities to improve the accuracy of contrail forecasting. And also OxCCU's innovative SAF formulations project is looking to reduce soot and particulate emissions, which are a driver in the generation of persistent warming contrails. So moving to the next slide, this is to let you know that all 4 of the roadmaps that you've just seen can be found in an interactive form on the ATI's website. And this allows you to click on each technology brick and open up a technology card that provides more information describing that technology. It gives the current state of the art and the advancements needed, plus there's additional guidance on areas for further low TRL research. These technology cards will be updated annually to ensure they stay relevant over the life of the roadmaps. And that concludes the introduction to the new roadmaps themselves and the new technology targets and deliverables pages. And I want to add my thanks to the many stakeholders from across industry, academia, research organisations and others for their valuable input and support to the ATI technologists who have compiled and consolidated the technological content and the descriptions within this section. The next and final slide for me turns to the ATI funding programme scope. So the ATI roadmaps that you now have seen define the technology scope of the ATI funding programmes. So this means that projects must align with one or more of the technology bricks on any one or multiple roadmaps. ATI funded industrial research projects typically cover technology developments that sit within technology readiness levels or manufacturing readiness levels 3 to 6 and are applicable to large commercial aircraft now or in the future. Projects may have a dual-use application or have an initial exploitation through smaller aircraft, provided there is a route to scale the technology to performance levels needed for larger aircraft in the future. And these new roadmaps will apply to applications for batch 51 onwards, and the outline stage for batch 51 opens in September this year. As we always say, please engage with us to discuss your ideas or application before applying, and we can help advise you. So thank you, and we can now move on to discuss the 3rd section of the strategy with Sophie.
Thank you, Jackie. I'm Sophie Lane. I'm the Chief Relationships Officer for the ATI. And you've heard about the growth opportunity, you've heard about the technologies that underpin it. And the 3rd and final section of the strategy is really looking at how investors can use those technology roadmaps to target their investment beyond what the ATI programme can do. And I'm not differentiating between the different kinds of investor when I talk about this. You could be a company of any size looking at the R&D that you're doing for the future. You could be a private investor or potentially a public investor. And what we wanted to do was to provide some more granularity behind the analysis that we've shared, and also an indication of how to access wider funding across the UK and international ecosystem. And I think that's really important because as we go forward, the ATI programme will not be able to fund everything that needs to be done to meet that big growth ambition. And we're being very honest about that. What we want to do is work with you to understand where the largest return on investment could be and how to access it. So if we break down the three big areas of growth, as Paul said, the UK's biggest market opportunity is in single aisle and specifically in propulsion. So what you can see here is a chart which explains what we think the future market is compared to the current market, and that is based on that future market scenario that you saw, and also modelling that's been done within the ATI. We believe that targeted investments in whole engine design and manufacturing could increase the total value of UK propulsion by a factor of 6 over the next 25 years to over 17 billion. The propulsion aftermarket value is also extensive and is not included in those figures. So there is a huge market opportunity here. And we will be deep diving into this and the hybridization opportunity in future publications to come out from the ATI over the course of the rest of the year. If you then think about structures, 50% of the world's wings are produced by Airbus in the UK currently, and retaining this work share is absolutely critical to those figures that we talked about before, but also growing the supply chain that underpins that work and around it is key to the growth projections. The value of UK manufactured aerostructures was 3.3 billion per annum in 2025, and we believe it could grow to 9.7 billion by 2050. And again, we will be looking at a number of areas where we can explain more about that opportunity. And one of the areas that we've already kind of talked about is the composite opportunity. But we also think that targeted investments are needed in advanced design and manufacturing technologies that will enable higher aspect ratio and more aerodynamically efficient wings. We'll also be producing papers on metallics, automation and assembly, which will support the market opportunity in this area and give more detail about where we think the growth is and also where the largest return on investment can be gained. In terms of that analysis, we have already identified a number of areas where we can invest to substantially grow market value. And we already published a paper on composites, which I mentioned earlier. This was the first market spotlight that we produced last year, and we targeted 6 times growth within this area within that document. What that document did was set out what we believed the ATI would be able to achieve, what we thought we would fund, and actually what we thought the entire market potential was and the delta that might need additional investment. And we've been working across the sector for the last year to develop a strategy to deliver on that potential. And that'll be published soon with those further market spotlights, really deep diving into future areas to be able to aid decision making on the areas that you might like to invest. Finally, then, the UK has deep expertise in the design and manufacture of diverse aircraft systems, including electrical systems, landing gear, fuel systems, actuation, thermal management, and avionics. The development of next generation platforms is going to see the complexity and value of onboard systems increase hugely. And we believe the opportunity for the UK is to go from a market value of $4 billion in 2025 to $13 billion by 2050. And we'll be producing more information related to the opportunities for AI in aerospace and electrification of systems in the coming months. So you've heard about the opportunity, you've heard about the technologies, and you've heard about where we are starting to show you more information about the market. But we're here to support the sector to deliver against all of those targets, not only the economic, but also the technological ones set out in this strategy. And together with the right investment, leadership, and collaboration, our sector can deliver a stronger sector, high value jobs, and economic growth. We're going to commit to you today to work with public and private investors to highlight the business case for funding in addition to the ATI programme, and to work with our advisory groups and the wider global sector to develop the market intelligence and technical insight that will inform the investment decisions that are needed. We're also going to work closely with partners across the wider innovation and investment landscape to unlock the barriers to UK competitiveness and align the funding, regulation, policy and decision making to support the priorities identified in this strategy. And finally, we are going to monitor and report against those targets. And so annually, we will be producing as part of our annual report a view on how the sector is progressing against these targets and to work with you to test and adjust to ensure that we deliver to our full potential. So that is a very brief overview of our new strategy. And I'd like to welcome Gary, Paul and Jackie back for our live Q&A. You can submit questions via the Q&A function in your Teams window, and I will be moderating and seeing how we're doing with those questions, and we will keep hopefully answering them all for the rest of the time that we have for this webinar. So I'm just going to wait a couple of seconds for the first questions to start coming through. Okay, so the first question that we've got says, can you say more about where the rest of the investment might come from? Paul, I'm going to invite you to talk to that, if that's okay.
Absolutely. So the answer, I guess, where's the rest of the investment come from? A variety of different sources. And that's because the different types of organisations and different types of technologies, frankly, need different types of backers. So we already know, for example, through our SME programme, which has been running for just over 2 years now, that having delivered in the region of £30 million worth of grant funding, that those organisations collectively have raised over £70 million worth of venture capital funding to support future growth in those sectors. We already know that a number of organisations who apply for ATI funding also look to bring international partners with them to bring inward investment into the UK via those international partners as well. And we already know that a number of the kind of mid-tier supply chain organisations use ATI funding as, I guess, an endorsement to find other forms of external backing, whether that be bank finance, whether that be private equity or other sources. So we already know that happens all over the sector today. We are working quite proactively actually with a number of those areas to try and support and encourage further investment, and that includes other public sources of investment but also other private sources of investment, because we think there's even more potential to help support the sector to drive the kind of growth and opportunities that we see.
Thank you very much, Paul. Jackie, I've got one for you here, which is, does this new strategy mean any changes to my existing project application?
No, not if it's in the current process. And I think what you'll find if you look at Destination Zero roadmaps and these roadmaps, whilst we've made a lot of change, the themes are running through. These are long-term sort of themes for aerospace development. So I wouldn't expect people to find a problem in terms of locating their technology choices. But obviously, if there are any doubts at all, then please come and speak to us and we can discuss that with you.
And Jackie, can you also just speak to whether we are open to supporting different fuels beyond thinking about SAFs or hydrogen?
Yes, they are. I mean, the technology bricks that would manage those different fuels are applicable on the roadmaps, especially on the zero carbon roadmap, I would imagine. So again, those can be discussed. I mean, like all of our project assessments, there needs to be obviously the business case around the application of the technology and the sort of, exploitation route in order to sort of realise those technologies. And those are key things that also need to be explained alongside the technology that's being applied for.
Perfect. Paul, I've got another question for you related to smaller SMEs and how they can get noticed or fit into the supply chain, and what support there is available for smaller companies.
So that's a really good question. So there's quite a lot of support available within the ATI today, and that comes both through the ATI Hub, which is a way of helping organisations understand how the ATI can support them. It comes through our technology team, who are actively all over the country most days of the week visiting companies big and small to understand their technology. And it comes from, I guess, the convening power that the ATI brings, that can bring those different opportunities together centrally and put some of those small companies up in front of some of the larger organisations to showcase their technology. We're really keen to see applications that bring big organisations with big market opportunity that also weave in SMEs into their ATI funding bids, and we do actively help to bring those sorts of applications together. And then I suppose the second part of the answer, Sophie, is there is also a network of resources and support available across the UK that understands the ATI ecosystem really well, and that includes things like the Regional Aerospace Alliances. It includes things like ADS, the industry body, and the AGP, and then of course the high value manufacturing catapult centres, many of whom have worked with the ATI for most of the ATI's lifespan.
Cool. Can we talk a little bit about dual use? So there are a few questions in the chat asking about defence and about links into defence innovation. I'll give you a sense of the types of questions coming through. So there is a question around crossover between potentially something like GCAP and where there is technology that might apply to both, including those industrial competitive technologies. And there's also around the extent to which we're engaging with the MOD around their industrial strategy and the extent to which we might be kind of considering that going forward. Jackie, I'm going to point that at you, I think.
Yes, I'm happy to comment on that. So, I mean, in a lot of cases, many technologies are dual use by nature. We are, if I look at answer this question in a number of ways, when we talk about investment, we are taking action to work more closely alongside defence colleagues and the MOD to try to understand how we can join together parallel sort of streams of investment to support dual use technologies and to ensure that we can sort of progress them for the benefits of both civil and dual use applications. I think there's also, if a technology has a dual use application, identifying that in the spillover benefits as part of the project application is also something that's really important. It's good to understand that. It could be that a technology may have an initial exploitation through a defence route, but we know that that will pull through to a commercial application in time. Again, we're interested in understanding those types of applications.
And I think it's true to say, Jackie, that when we talk about dual use, although traditionally that's related to defence, we don't just mean defence. We're also talking about adjacent sectors and the potential for materials, for example, to be used in the energy sector or crossover between automotive and aerospace.
Absolutely, yes. Yes, those are good examples. And I think this is where the link to the modern industrial strategy is key, because lots of these technologies are multi-sector.
Gary, I've got one for you here. The timeline for zero emission aircraft has gone back significantly. Has this changed your appetite to invest in these? The business case diminishes with these timescales, question mark.
No is the answer, simply put, because we need these technologies to be ready to have an impact beyond 2050, and that's what we're forecasting. So we need to be investing in these technologies today and proving them out. And there were already some examples given earlier on, ZeroAvia and others that are applying those types of technologies that will have an impact beyond 2050. So absolutely not is a simple answer, yeah.
And in terms of support for companies, we talk very much around TRL or MRL6. There are a few questions in the chat just asking about, well, what support exists beyond that? And I suppose as well, and I'll ask this one, what can we do to support beyond that as well as what already exists? And I mean, Gary, Paul, I'm not sure which one of you wants to take that first.
Well, I can give an example, and Paul can chip in. But Paul alluded to it. So connecting with other organisations in the ecosystem that can help people. So whether that be private investors or the British Business Bank or the National Wealth Fund, we've certainly seen examples of companies in the portfolio that have connected with these organisations to seek other funding beyond TRL6 and MRL6. So there are success stories about that. Our role in that is trying to make the connections and help people with that process, because sometimes it's difficult to find a way through. So we'll continue to do that, as Paul alluded to, in the hub and through other mechanisms. But I think that there are really great opportunities with some of these organisations, which is again government mandates and policy, which is very positive for the UK. Yeah.
I'd agree with that, Gary. And I think maybe what I'd add to that is there's a big difference between the TRL gap in depending on the type of technology you're investing in, right? So Gary talked about some of the zero carbon technologies, which absolutely potentially have quite a big gap from TRL6 through to actually entry into service. But we see a huge amount of applications and funding that goes into projects that are already making a difference on the shop floor today. Two good examples that come to mind: the outer wing box at Cheekan Aerospace in Filton and the spoiler line at Prestwick Aerosystems Limited, where automation allowed the reshoring of a component that's more than delivered on its business case. Well post TRL6.
It's possibly also worth saying that to the dual use and particularly the defence side of things, we're seeing a lot of technologies that are being applied to defence while the commercial market tries to catch up. So I think it's positive in terms of exploitation and proving it out, but obviously it then benefits commercial aviation in the future. So it's a slight change, I suppose, in the environment given the circumstances and geopolitics, but definitely good in terms of positive exploitation for UK industry. Yeah.
Jackie, can I ask you to talk a little bit more about non-CO2 and contrails? Can you talk about the scope of the programme and the projects that we might be looking to support?
Yes, okay, there's multiple sort of angles to this, if you like. So there are projects which are looking at sensing on aircraft in order to understand if you're flying through a region of supersaturated sort of ice where you may form a contrail. So there are those types of, then you may be able to take evasive action in order to avoid producing one. There are potential projects that look more at the overall sort of treat those regions like weather events, if you like, and then look at whether you could arrange your flight plan to avoid the region. So it's not sort of live adjustments, it's more sort of planning up front. So overall, we're looking at a number of opportunities to mitigate the production of contrails, and then that will obviously avoid the warming impact that they can have.
Jackie. Paul, I've got a question for you around the programme and about making essentially the business case. There is one question which asks more generally, are we changing the VFM assessment? But there's a more specific question as well that talks about previously it being quite difficult maybe to make a business case for industrial competitives type technologies because it doesn't directly lead to product sales in and of itself necessarily. Can you just talk a little bit to how we view that, please?
Absolutely. So I guess one of the things that's important to say from the start is the assessment process through the ATI programme isn't solely carried out by the ATI. It's a tri-party activity that's carried out by Innovate UK and by the Department for Business and Trade, who own a lot of the value for money assessment process. The predominant features of that aren't changing. This is a change in an evolution of our technology strategy rather than changing our assessment process. So that's answering that part of the question directly. I guess in terms of the how do you make the business case work? Well, earlier in the Q&A, I outlined some of the kinds of support mechanisms that we offer, and it's fair to say that those organisations and applications that engage at very early stages with those support mechanisms, for obvious reasons, see better overall results in terms of outcomes, because we're able to work closely with those organisations to help them with their application, both in terms of making the value for money arguments, but also understanding the likely impact. So, we've deliberately changed the cross-cutting enablers roadmap to emphasise the importance of industrial competitiveness, because we see that as absolutely critical to securing the next generation of aircraft content here in the UK, and we want to work with organisations looking to make applications in that area to the programme to make sure they're successful, because just like Jackie outlined and I guess Sophie mentioned as well, we are looking to report on our impact across all three roadmaps on an annual basis, and we absolutely want to see as much progress as possible in that area, as well as the other roadmaps.
Could I add one other thing, Sophie, just on that as well? Because, I mean, we talk about the technologies themselves, but a lot of the value for the UK comes from then the resultant manufacture of those technologies in country, and obviously the benefits that come from that in terms of sort of jobs and export value and GVA. So we're very interested in, the manufacturing route and exploitation of the sort of technologies that are being developed. So it's a big, significant area. And that's why we have the industrial competitiveness roadmap predominantly that covers a lot of those aspects.
Thanks, Jackie. Gary, can I ask you about your view on whether the ATI could look at sovereignty, particularly around things like advanced materials? I think, recent events, global events, have brought this to the fore. Would we consider things like sources of aluminium, titanium, nickel, bringing some kind of sovereignty to the UK to secure that supply and reduce dependency?
I think the role the ATI can provide in that is giving a view, an independent technical assessment and market assessment of that, because it is clearly a problem. And I suppose the best way to put it is the composite spotlight was almost a kind of a reverse view of that, an opportunity that we're signaling to the marketplace that there is a real opportunity for the supply chain to develop in the UK, and the same could be true for the sovereign capability side of things. So I think it is something we often give a view on. Jackie talked about the MOD. Sometimes we'll get questions from obviously government and industry about what our view on these things are. So absolutely is the answer, yes, and clearly we need to be capable and resilient for a future, particularly given the growth that we outlined through the last hour or so. So yes is the answer. Yeah.
Thank you. And Jackie and Paul, I'm going to ask you a question about program scope. So there are a couple of questions around drones, general aviation. If a project is looking at maybe smaller scale aircraft exploitation, so regional, is that something that you would still consider under the program?
So to come to that point. So we really, the technologies typically to deliver the sort of value for the UK, the technologies really need to be something that can eventually apply to a larger aircraft if we are to sort of prioritise the sort of returns on investment. So a technology may be applicable to one of those examples that you gave, like regional or general aviation or even drones in the early stages. That could be an early exploitation route. But if we then see that technology is something important to pull through and to evolve its performance to develop onto larger aircraft, then potentially, yes, we could be interested in that. And obviously, sometimes, especially with these newer technologies, they require this stepping stone approach, in order to prove them out, in order to sort of give confidence for use on larger aircraft eventually. So it's a slightly tricky area, which is why I would definitely ask people to speak to us, and then we can look at the specific context of the examples, that are brought forward and help advise.
Paul, your team has run a lot of the market modelling. Can you talk a little bit about the opportunity to do more? So essentially what the question is asking is, we're strong in a lot of areas, but where can we actually be stronger? How do we kind of drive forward these opportunities that you've been outlining?
So, Sophie, it's a fantastic question, because I think for a lot of manufacturing companies out there today, actually hanging on by, by their fingernails to a certain extent to the rate of growth that is going through the market at the moment feels tough. So, what we're forecasting through our modelling capability, and what likes of Boeing and Airbus have openly outlined is a huge increase, not just from where we are today, which is a tough rate increase, but to almost 100 aircraft a month per manufacturer in the future on single-aisle aircraft. So if we were to retain the kind of products that we do today, but simply make them at those kind of rates, we would see an enormous level of growth across the sector. In fact, we forecast the sector to double in the next 10 years, and that's without any new aircraft being launched at all. But what new opportunities might there be? Well, the most obvious one, and the one which you highlighted, Sophie, is in the propulsion sector, where there is a relatively limited amount of UK content on single-aisle aircraft in propulsion at the moment, and those are suppliers supplying directly to the likes of CFM or Pratt & Whitney. So the opportunity to work with the opportunity to work with Rolls-Royce to enable them to enter that part of the sector of the market is a huge growth opportunity for the UK, and then I guess alongside that in the areas of systems, and of course crucially in wing as well. You outlined the Airbus wing opportunity. There's an enormous amount of technology development that sits behind that. Airbus are looking to make a much simpler, a much longer wing, and that requires key manufacturing content, automation content, which needs to come from the UK, and then systems where we have real strength across the board. There's some great dual use opportunities, bringing some of potentially the communications technology which we see in the defence sector into the civil sector, alongside areas of strength already for the UK, like avionics and like seating.
And one of the areas that came up in conversation was MRO, and that really huge potential for aftermarket revenue. There's a question here just asking how we balance the opportunity for technology investment between those kind of original equipment components and MRO. Paul, can you talk to that?
Yeah, and hopefully there'll be no fire alarm in the middle of me answering this question. So I guess the way I would refer to that is, first of all, part A of the plan has to be secure the OE content in the UK. We want to be the production source for the OE content. That enables us not just to capture the market as it's delivered, but also capture providing those parts and services in aftermarket as well. The second part of that then is I guess the service element of the MRO, so the maintenance and repair. The UK has enormous strengths in this area today. I've visited a number of MRO facilities in the UK in the last 12 months since I've been in the ATI, and they're also an enormous opportunity for technology development. So things like robotics, automation, visual inspection, we're seeing already arrive in MRO, where some of the OE sectors are quite honestly following from a technology point of view. So I guess in a similar way to which Jackie addressed the question about drones, what we're really interested in is the exploitation of technology in a major civil aerospace sector. If the way that technology is proved and developed is in MRO, then absolutely, that's a key area of investment for us. But we also want to make sure that our original equipment and the manufacturing of that original equipment is secured here in the UK.
Okay. So just to be fair, I'm going to ask myself a question, which is related to whether we envisage more international collaboration given the global nature of the sector, and specifically drawn out here is supply chains. And the answer to that, I think, is yes. I think it has to be yes. And I spend a lot of time talking to global corporates who have bases here as well, and also international RTOs, and thinking about what they see as happening in the sector and where we potentially are complementary in our approach. I think there are some areas clearly that are highly competitive, and that's where we have to think carefully about partnerships. But there are also areas that are non-competitive, like non-CO2, where we can work together and actually there is global benefit for sharing. And I think there are lots of opportunities going forward for us to think strategically about where we can get most value. And if that involves partnering internationally to be able to accelerate that technology development and exploit it quicker, then I think that's something we need to be looking at and considering very carefully. Certainly from an ATI point of view, the programme is open for applications, including international partners, and we can talk to people about how to do that. And we work really closely as well with our European counterparts who run the funding programme there, the Clean Aviation Joint Undertaking, but also within individual company programs as well. And so we can support the supply chain to understand what the opportunities are there for partnership, but also to potentially help build those consortia and understand where those strengths might exist if needed. So that is definitely an area that I think we will be encouraging, as well as wider collaboration across our own sector within the UK. Okay,
Sophie,
go
could
on,
we just,
Jackie.
I was just going to add as well how the ATI programme and the strong ecosystem that we've got in the UK is really attractive for inward investment as well. So we're seeing quite a lot of international discussions happening in that frame as well, aren't we?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And indeed, we've seen a number of companies choose to open bases in the UK, or indeed production to be reshored to the UK because of the environment we're able to build. So the aim will be to continue to build on that going forward. Can I ask, please, about the ratio of funding? So the way that this has been put is kind of next gen versus zero carbon, but zero emission. But I guess if we just look at the roadmaps, how do you think the ratio of funding from the programme will look going forward? And I guess I'm going to come to Paul for that.
So that's a great question, Sophie, because I think what I said right at the start of my initial piece is we build a strategy that is dictated by the market. And as I said earlier, 70% of the future market volume as we see it is in the single aisle market category. And so, that rightly will demand the bulk of our investment. However, many of those investments will be equally applicable to wide body aircraft or even to smaller aircraft. And as Gary indicated in his answer to the kind of, how we're investing in zero carbon technologies, many of those need to start small so that they can be scaled over time. So whilst we follow the market, and whilst absolutely the data is clear that single aisle continues to dominate the market going forward, actually, we look for investments that, like anyone investing money, potentially have multiple routes of return.
Could I add something just to look at the longer term, Sophie? Because I think, our roadmap stretched to 2050 for a reason, because we want to keep an eye beyond the generation. And what Paul said is absolutely correct, of course. We have to secure the current sort of generational prize, like we called it. But our investments are part of an overall portfolio, and there could be real risks to the future generations of aerospace in the UK if we don't look at some of the revolutionary technologies that are coming through, and that is things like fuel cell systems and other areas like that. So we need to keep an eye on everything, but the focus will be sort of split accordingly.
Yeah, just building on that, you talked about a requirement for TRL6 around 2030. Is that, how might that differ in terms of the requirement across propulsion or structures or systems? And to what extent are you focused on MRL versus TRL?
I think the technology brick placement on the roadmaps is sort of deliberate in order to try and indicate when the TRL6 needs to be achieved, and that is to target like maximum exploitation opportunity, as we've described. So the 2030 timeframe is aligned to the sort of next generation single aisle opportunities that we anticipate. However, lots of those technologies are equally applicable, as we've said, to wide body, also some of the other aircraft that we indicated on the charts in the presentation there. We would expect to continue to sort of evolve some of those technologies. I mean, the 2030 timeframe for next generation single aisle is pretty consistent across aerostructures, systems and propulsion for that aircraft type, because all of those sort of decisions will be taken in the same sort of timeframe. Some of the manufacturing, again, it's important that the manufacturing can be demonstrated appropriate to a reasonable level of maturity in order to ensure that the technology can be selected. But there's probably a small amount of additional time in order to really look at ramp up and rate readiness sort of beyond that 2030. So 2035 would sort of be more of the MRL sort of target. But yeah, they both align together in a lot of cases. You can't really have one without the other.
I think that's one of the things that comes out really strongly in the strategy when people read it, is not only about the readiness, but also about the maturity. Can you just mention, what about if there are more capital intensive investments needed to support the development to TRL6? How would the ATI consider those kind of investments?
Do you want me to take that?
I'm thinking in terms of facilities or infrastructure.
Some of those, again, can be real enablers to unlocking the sort of future value. So they're absolutely open for consideration. Of course, it's a tougher area for us to cover, given that we don't have unlimited funding budget. But we've had some of the examples that we've given since Destination Zero were capital projects that have established, really essential either research or manufacturing sort of facilities for the future. So they're completely open for consideration, Sophie. And we will also work in conjunction with many other partners around the country to hopefully partner up and support some of these projects, because regional development aid or other local sort of government sources of funding can come into play for some of these types of projects.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think the other thing to add to that is I suppose we played a role in trying to consolidate demand. So look at the demand across the sector in the UK and then signal that to other investors or people that are already in that supply chain. So we've definitely done that. We continue to do that, and we will continue to pursue that, because I think that's a real opportunity for the ATI. You know, sat independently in the centre of all of the sector in the UK. So yeah.
I've got a great question here for you, which is, what do you think is the biggest obstacle to realising the goal of doubling the UK market value? And I mean, the questioner has mentioned, is it about government support? Is it skills? Is it funding? Is it competition? Where do you think the biggest challenges are that we need to overcome as a sector?
I think all of the above, right? I would encourage everybody to be ambitious, right? You know, we've been lucky to have funding from the government for the last 12 years and the commitment out to 2035. So, you know, use that and bring your ambition, right? Bring your entrepreneurial, technical ambition to the sector. And I suppose I might get some wry smiles from my colleagues here, but I would also do find ways to use artificial intelligence, because if you don't, you got to get caught out. So please, you know, for me, that is almost an industrial revolution in itself. So find a way to do that. So obviously, Sophie mentioned the paper that we're writing that we'll launch at some point in the near future, but that was there to try to give you, when you don't have the capacity to figure out how to use AI, some hints and some ideas as to how you might use that application. But yeah, be ambitious.
Okay, I'm gonna ask Jackie and Paul if they've got anything to add to that, because I think it's one of those really big questions that we're going to be grappling with for the next kind of 10 years. So, Paul, maybe I'll start with you.
Well, so, you know, I think for us, that doubling of the sector comes from current generation of aircraft, right? So many of the investments that are needed to get us there are already there. There is no doubt there is a kind of not just a generational opportunity beyond that, but also a kind of, I guess, a generational challenge with workforce and skills to both secure some of the skills of the workforce that are starting to move towards retirement age, but also bring through that next generation who bring differing skills, including some of the kinds of opportunities and technologies Gary's just outlined. That for me feels absolutely key in support of the technology investments that we need to make.
Jackie, what do you think is the biggest obstacle to realising the goals we've set out?
Like we said, a lot of that relies on the investment that's already been made from the ATI over the past sort of 10 years. So I think it's fairly fundamentally sat with manufacturing and sort of realising that opportunity. And we can continue to push those technological advancements in manufacturing and automation to be able to meet the rate ramp up and to sort of realise that doubling. But at the same time, we need to then look beyond that, because the next quadrupling that we want to do is beyond that again, isn't it? And we need to continue to invest to sort of make sure that that's realised in future.
I guess if I reflect on it, I think the challenge for me is around how people can balance the challenges and the delivery requirements they have today with those innovations they need to make for the future, and balancing being a business that needs to make ends meet, but also needs to ensure that they're able to survive. And I think that's really difficult. And, you know, the ATI, it is not going to be able to solve that for anyone. But I hope that with some of the stuff that we're looking at, we ought to be able to highlight those challenges and try and help to unblock some of them where they exist. Paul, I'm going to ask you a question, please, about timescales and about how long it takes to apply for the programme through to getting the money. I know you've made some improvements and some changes. So I don't know when the questionnaire last applied to the programme, but I wonder whether you could maybe talk to that, please, and explain what we're doing, and can we go quicker?
So I guess there's kind of a couple of parts to this question. Of course, we can always go quicker, and my main focus in the last 12, 18 months since joining the ATI has been to try and make the funding process slicker. One of the ways we've done that is to take some great learning from the SME programme, where we run an outline stage, which is a short presentational pitch, and apply that to the main funding programme. So before you make your full stage application, you come and you provide us an outline of your application, and we'll give you an answer within 7 days as to whether we think that is going to meet the requirements of the main funding programme. That's a kind of transformational change from where we were previously in terms of the timescales that it took to get people an initial answer on funding opportunities. We are then, of course, turning to the main stage application process, both for the strategic programme and for the SME programme, and I do hope to be able to make some significant improvements to the timescales that takes. As I've already mentioned, there are 3 parties who are running these assessments, and so to a certain extent we have to work across those 3 parties and deliver the level of due diligence you'd expect a government funded, therefore taxpayer funded programme to go through, to make sure we are giving money to the right kinds of opportunities. But there are also other smaller opportunities, different opportunities for the SME programme to take timescales out. And a good example of that is we are looking to provide notification to SMEs earlier in the process, because for many of our large investments, obviously, ministerial announcements might want to be made. For the SMEs, that's less applicable, and we know often those SMEs need not only their cash flow, but also might have other sources of funding or recruitment decisions that are dependent on receiving ATI funding. So we're really keen to make changes. It's been a key priority of mine since joining, and I will continue with that level of focus.
Paul, is there anything that you can do around the ratio of funding required? Would you ever consider moving to 100% funding for SMEs?
So that is something that was certainly be in the gift of the Department for Business and Trade rather than the ATI itself. I think in reality, I guess my view would be, if I'm a private investor looking to invest in an organisation for technology and intellectual property, I want to see that organisation believes and backs itself, and therefore invests some of its own cash in that technology, as well as the funding that it might borrow from me as a private investor. And I think the same applies as the ATI. We want to see organisations, and we want to support organisations that have those kind of embryonic ideas, embryonic opportunities that have huge market potential. That's why we have different funding ratios for the SME programme versus a strategic programme. But that still requires, if I can use the term, a certain amount of skin in the game from those organisations as well.
Okay, thank you. Jackie, have we considered supporting lower TRL activity?
Not directly in terms of funding, because we are sticking within our TRL 3 to 6. However, we are working extremely closely with the lower TRL community. As I mentioned in the presentation, they have inputted into the strategy. We have put many pointers to sort of guide and steer, hopefully usefully, the lower TRL academics and fundamental sort of research activities so that they can deliver for the sector alongside us. So it's not a direct funding opportunity in that sense. However, it's really important to work closely, like I say, and get that push and pull of what the low TRL community can offer versus what the industrials want from them. And we're really active in a collaborative sort of manner with the stakeholders across that part of the sector.
And in terms of technology application, you've talked a lot about on-aircraft technology. Do we potentially also look at things like ground infrastructure? And I think the questioner is particularly asking around related to SAF and implementing that.
We are not funding ground infrastructure for SAF or airports directly. Again, they're adjacent, very closely adjacent in some cases, and we work alongside those parts of the sector. If there are technological sort of interfaces and things that we need to discuss, especially around refueling of future fuels, for example, but not funding SAF infrastructure directly. That answers the question.
Thank you. And we're getting towards the end of the Q&A. There are still a number of questions. I'm going to try and get through as many as I can. Can you talk about the extent to which you've considered the timeline for certifications? So I know when you've kind of talked about EIS, you're obviously working back from there to get to TRL6. Have you considered certification, particularly for maybe some of the newer technologies and applications for like smart systems or AI, that kind of thing?
So we've probably taken, we have taken sort of usual time frame, if you like, for certification. So typically a new aircraft launch development will take in the region of 7 years minimum. There are targets to try and reduce this design and manufacturing lead times, as I've explained, but if you take that sort of time frame and then work back with that, allows time for the certification processes. I mean, some of the projects that we have seen come through the program recently have looked at smarter testing, have looked at more sort of virtual verification. So there are ways to try and reduce that certification approach. So that is considered.
Perhaps I could cover this briefly as well, because I think part of this pertains to the question you asked me a second ago, Sophie, around the speed of our funding programme. So we recognise there is a lot of agility required to be ready for certification in the timescales we're talking about. And one of the big differences between the ATI programme and perhaps some of our European equivalents is, they run maybe a funding programme once every 2 years. We're not only running 3 funding rounds a year, so that's 6 for every one of the European equivalent, but we run 3 outline stages for each of those. So when organisations are looking at projects, what we hope is that gives them the opportunity not only to have kind of multiple touch points with the ATI and conversations, but also actually to break projects down into maybe smaller blocks that go through the funding process in a much more agile way, and can enable them to get key bits of technology accelerated versus other programs that maybe take longer, and require a different approach to development.
Yeah, and I think it would be fair to say that we have stronger and more frequent conversations with certification authorities than we have done in the past, particularly around new technologies coming through and making sure that they are aware of what future requirements might be and introducing them to companies who might be developing things that they wouldn't want to know more about at this stage. And also, within the strategy, we talk about the fact that the regulation, the technology and the infrastructure really need to develop in tandem so that they're all available at the right time to be able to deploy these technologies as early as possible to get the benefits from them.
Absolutely.
Paul, can you talk about the analysis that we've done on already completed ATI projects, and are we kind of looking at how we can take projects that have been completed and build on them to the next stage? How do we work with companies who are completing their projects?
So absolutely, we keep very close contact with many of the projects, follow them right through to conclusion. I named a couple earlier in the manufacturing space, but actually there are many projects that we know of across the board that are in service in fleets today. So, seeing those projects through to industrialization is really important to us. And, I guess one of the things you've also outlined, however, through this report, Sophie, or through this new technology strategy, is we're going to do even more of that going forward. We want to see as much value as possible delivered for the UK sector. And that means parts flying on aircraft in service on today's generation of aircraft as well as tomorrow's.
Absolutely. Right, I think we've come to the end of the Q&A. We didn't quite get through all the questions, but we will attempt to answer them separately. There was one question asking whether presentation would be available. We have recorded this and we will be putting the entire presentation on our YouTube channel, so you'll be able to look at it all there. But now I'm going to hand back to Gary Elliott to close the session.
Thank you, Sophie. Okay, so that obviously completes the webinar itself. So I just want to say thank you to all of the contributors. Jackie mentioned that, but there are a vast number of people that have had an input to the strategy, be it academia, industry, government, and the more broader ecosystem. So many thanks for your inputs. It's the strength of the strategy from that contribution. So thank you very much. And there are plenty of opportunities for people to engage with the ATI. So you can register with our mailing list, you can join our events, and of course you can engage directly with the 3 funding programs that Paul's talked variously about. So in the meantime, obviously take a deep dive into the strategy itself. It's on our website, ati.org.uk. And then last but not least, thank you for joining us and taking the time to listen today. Hopefully we'll see you all again soon, perhaps at Farnborough in July, but thank you for your time and goodbye for now.